Thanks. We should be live here in a few seconds. Cool. So we are live. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ethan Gregory Dodge. I am super excited for this event that we are calling Racism in Facial Recognition. And we're super excited for this event. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We have a few people here in the Zoom conference with us, and we also have a lot of people, hopefully a lot of people, tuning in on the various streams across the internet. We're streaming live on Twitch and YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and our speaker Isedua is very passionate about, and we are extremely lucky to have her come and join us. We're going to just get right into it right after we introduce all of our co-sponsors really quick. We have 8 co-sponsors, 8 amazing organizations that help put this together. The first one is the Citizens Privacy Coalition of Santa Clara County. It is a grassroots volunteer-run organization that exists to watch the watchers and empower the people of Santa Clara County by fighting against corrupt and racist surveillance. You can learn more at cpcscc.org. We also have Siren. Siren has been providing services and advocacy for over 33 years. Siren has a vision of a new America where immigrants and refugees are valued, integrated, and seen as essential to our society, and where the human rights of all persons are protected and honored. Our 4 program areas include legal services, policy, advocacy, community organizing, and civic engagement. We also have Change SCC. Change is an acronym that stands for the Coalition of Humans Against Negligent Government Entities. We are a nonpartisan group that is dedicated to nonviolent direct action. Our vision is to establish a group of organizations and community members to create tension among the ones who have been deemed negligent for failing their communities in order for them to be forced to confront the issue. And then we also have Justice Vanguard. We are Justice Vanguard, a group of passionate and hardworking students, educators, community leaders, artists, and other volunteers joined together for the movement of Black liberation, tackling systemic oppression head on. We aim to continue shining light on intersectional systems of power that affect Black folks across the board, and more specifically within the Peninsula Bay Area at large. Besides organizing protests, we also collaborate to educate local communities, produce artwork, and engage in local politics to fight for social and political change. So those are our first 4 co-sponsors. I'm going to hand it over to my good friend Mary. She's going to introduce the rest of the co-sponsors as well as our speaker.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan, for handing it off to me. And also thank you so much for organizing and hosting this event. It's an honor to be here alongside you and to introduce our guest speaker today. So the first additional organization to mention is San Jose Strong. That's my organization. I'm the founder of San Jose Strong. We're a grassroots organization to reinvent San Jose for and by the community. Since our inception 5 months ago, we have... I want to see if she's still there. I don't know if she dropped out. Anyways, so I just wanted to make sure that the guest speaker was still here before I kept going. But I'll keep going and we'll see what happens. And so, yeah, San Jose Strong is a grassroots organization to reinvent San Jose for and by the community. Since our inception 5 months ago, to build a digital platform for information dissemination on a city scale. We've scaled up to have over 12 active committees, over 75 active volunteers, and a lot of people following our social media accounts. So we tackle a wide variety of topics, really being a space for members of the community to come together, use their skills, empower each other, and develop their tools to better serve the community while we showcase that work on our digital platforms in our website to empower community members to use their civic voice and their skills to enact positive change. Next, I'll be introducing Hero Tent. Hero Tent stands for Human Empowerment Radical Optimism. We are a grassroots org that developed during the George Floyd protests in San Jose. HERO's goal is to support and sustain human rights activism. Our primary focus is sustaining the current Black Lives Matter movement happening throughout the country, and our service projects like Feed the Block, which aims to feed our unhoused neighbors and supply them with personal items. Learn more at herotent.org or follow us on Instagram at HeroTent. Similarly, for San Jose Strong, you can just look San Jose Strong up, find us on Instagram, our website, all the good things. Next org that we're going to be introducing is Black Outreach San Jose. Black Outreach stands for Black Liberation and Collective Knowledge, and they are an organization that strives for the full liberation of Black people and to expand the collective knowledge of all people, and also are in support and collaboration for the Feed the Block project that I just mentioned. The last sponsored group that we're showcasing here is NAACP San Jose chapter. The mission of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic quality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. And so it looks like our guest speaker just hopped back on. Perfect timing. I literally just and so I'm honored to introduce Isedua Oribhabor, who is Access Now's U.S. policy analyst, also covering business and human rights. She received her JD from Fordham Law School in New York City, as well as an LLM in international business law from Universidad Pontificia Comillas in Madrid. Apologies for butchering any amount of that pronunciation.
Okay.
Isedua work with the Littner Center for International Law and Justice at Fordham sparked her interest in business and human rights, leading her to pursue the topic as it relates to the technology sector. Isedua was previously a legal and policy fellow working with Access Now's policy team in Latin America, but has since defected to New York. Besides social justice, Isedua's other deep passion in life is Van Gogh.
I totally forgot all the stuff that was in that bio. Otherwise, I've given you a new one. Thank you for the introduction, and I apologize for disappearing. Before we start talking about facial recognition, we can talk about connectivity. And I'm currently in my parents' house where whenever someone turns on the microwave, then the Wi-Fi, I'm not joking, the Wi-Fi just like falls apart. So hopefully no one will microwave anything in the next hour or so. But seriously, thank you again for the introduction and for letting me be a part of this meeting today. Just hearing from what I could hear of the organizations we're co-sponsoring, it's such a privilege to be doing a joint event with organizations that are doing such great work like all of you. So hopefully we can learn from each other. I'm sure that either Mary or Ethan mentioned that would like this to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to interrupt at any point with questions, and we'll try to make this good for everybody. Okay, so barring any more microwaving, yes.
On that vein, I should have said this before. I apologize for interrupting. For those that are watching the stream, so there are a number of people here in the Zoom, and they're gonna be asking questions. But if you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're watching, we have people monitoring the comments on all those platforms. If you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so, and we will get to them. So take it away.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll get started. And as Ethan, I think, mentioned earlier, today we're talking about facial recognition and racism in facial recognition technology and the surveillance that comes with that. So we're essentially going to discuss kind of the two levels of bias that is involved in facial recognition. First is in the tech itself, and then in how the tech is being applied. But before we talk about that, I think it would be helpful to go through some definitions so that we're all on the same page of what we mean when we talk about facial recognition. So facial recognition is kind of an umbrella term that's used to cover different kinds of processes that some technology can do, which includes identification, detection, authentication, and classification. So detection is kind of the lowest level of facial recognition, where a system can tell, is there a face or not, and where. Detection is usually the first step to any of the other kinds of processes that facial recognition tools can do, just by classifying whether or not there is a face to analyze. An example of this is if you go on your phone and you pull up your camera and you can tap on your face to adjust the settings. That's an example of what facial detection looks like. So even though this is kind of the lowest level in terms of the kinds of processes you can use for facial recognition, it does still bring risks associated with it. So for instance, the things that can affect the way this technology works is how the data was trained. So for a tool to be able to tell what a face is and where a face is, it has to be trained to recognize faces. And as we're all aware, historically, the makers of these tools have been white dudes sitting in Silicon Valley. And so most of that data was trained on a specific kind of face. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the research by Joy Bolamwini and some of her colleagues identifying the implicit racial bias in some facial recognition technologies that have a much higher rate of identifying and misidentifying Black women specifically. So even just the way that the data is trained poses risks when it comes to when it comes to how it works and how it's been applied. But beyond the way the data is trained, even the tool itself actually comes with implicit risks and biases. So for instance, most of these tools are optimized, like I mentioned earlier, for white faces. So not only was it trained on white faces, but it then becomes optimized for those faces. And a good example of this is, you might have seen the news recently with bar examinations happening online, students taking tests needing to shine a light specifically on their faces in order for the facial recognition tools that examiners have been using to prevent cheating and so forth to work. So it becomes an issue of, a student taking an exam, needing to shine a bright light on your face, and the risks of that that come with that, of headaches and other things involved. So that's kind of like the lowest level of processes that a facial recognition system can possibly do. And the next step is authentication or verification. And this is essentially a one-to-one matching. So what that means is that there will be a kind of a closed database of faces. And in order to gain entry, for example, into a building or an office, this tool will need to match your face to the list of faces that it has, and to verify that you are this person. So yeah, this needs a database of previously stored faces. It's often used for things like gaining entry into buildings, and in settings where there's kind of like a smaller group of people who have privileged access to some place. But the risks that come with that, of course, could be people losing access to their building or to spaces they're privileged to be in if this technology does not identify their faces properly. I think here in New York, in New York, there's a case from a couple of years ago where some tenants got together because the landlord had instituted facial recognition technology in order for them to enter the building without even consulting with the tenants there. And as we discussed, even in the most basic function of facial recognition, you can have biases in the way the data is trained or how it's optimized. Imagine needing to rely on that to enter into the place you live and the issues that can come up if, for whatever reason, it misidentifies you and locks you out of your home. The next process that it could do is identification. And identification is kind of what I think most people think of when we think of facial recognition, because that's when you have one face that is being scanned against a database of many. So it's not a one-to-one like you have with verification, where you find a face in your database, face in the tool, and match it together. This is more of like you have one face being scanned either in lifetime or later on against a massive database. An example would be Facebook, the Facebook tool that allows it to tag your friends for you. So for that to work, Facebook will have to match every face in the photo against its enormous database of faces and the database of people within your friend group. It can also be done kind of in the opposite way. So rather than matching like a one-to-many, more of like a many-to-one. So for instance, if police are using live facial recognition to find suspects, that happens kind of like automatically. And there could be, for instance, they could be looking for a man with a blue hat. So the tool can just run itself in real time and find within the faces that appear there if there's someone who fits that description. Most of the risks with facial recognition kind of get much larger the more processes and tasks the technology is able to do. So you can imagine with something like identification, the risk could be maybe something as small as you get the wrong face, or something as large as being wrongfully arrested or detained if police are using it. But one of the biggest risks of using this kind of facial recognition is the potential for mass surveillance. So when you no longer kind of expect the same kind of privacy rights you would in public, for instance, you're going to a protest and police are running live facial recognition, that interferes with our fundamental and constitutionally granted rights to protests, to assembly, to expression, to association. And that's why I'm sure many of the organizations working around facial recognition might have different positions on the kinds of facial recognition that should be used, but by far and large, mass surveillance is always on the list of the kinds of facial recognition that should be absolutely banned. That's mass surveillance is just not allowable under any circumstance. And the final category here of facial recognition is classification or categorization. So everything else this includes kind of everything else I could possibly do with a face, whether it's classifying it by age, emotion, gender, propensity for violent behavior, sexuality, health, and many more. Some of these things sound like straight out of like a Black Mirror episode, but there are examples already of how this technology is being used in those ways. So for instance, in Brazil, Access Now was involved in a case in Brazil with a tool that was meant to detect emotion and gender. So first of all, the question is like, if you're detecting gender, what is a feminine or masculine category, and what's about people who are non-binary, and more questions that play into that. And this year we've seen even more examples when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've seen examples of countries using facial recognition systems that are enabled with temperature sensing or heat sensing capabilities in order to determine if someone has COVID, for instance. And this could have huge implications of where you're allowed to travel, how free you are to move. So the risks just keep getting much higher the more processes this kinds of technology can do. And again, when it comes to like the classification and categorization stuff, that's all sounds very sci-fi-ish, and there's still not a lot of evidence that it's actually accurate. So with all of the risks that come there, it seems like the obvious answer should be, well, why don't we just make facial recognition 100% accurate all the time, so that it identifies everybody regardless of race, gender, anything equally. And that's not necessarily the answer. So removing bias from facial recognition is not simply a question of making sure that a technology is created as unbiasedly as possible, but that it's used in a non-biased way. And we already know that that's very, not to be skeptical, but very, very highly unlikely that it would be. So for instance, if police have a facial recognition tool, they're much more likely to employ it in Brooklyn, for example, than they are on the Upper East Side. And just by virtue of where the technology is being applied, there are inherent biases and risks to that just really can't be diminished. So it comes to, so we can discuss different kinds of applications. So I mentioned law enforcement a couple of times. Law enforcement's use, I'm sure a lot of the organizations here are aware of that since it's kind of like the work that you do. So we've seen police departments using it, other levels of government authorities using facial recognition tools. And like I mentioned, the risk of these tools gets exacerbated based on what the worst case scenario would be. So if the worst case scenario is that you get, I don't know, getting locked out of your building versus getting being put in prison falsely. And oftentimes it seems that these risks are kind of far-fetched, but even just this year, we've had examples of Black Lives Matter protesters being tracked with facial recognition and being arrested based on facial recognition used at protests. Again, while doing an activity that is constitutionally protected within their fundamental rights, they're subjected to very intrusive technology. So law enforcement, yeah.
Can you maybe, I'd be interested to hear specifically where that happened, in like what cities and whatnot, and if you have more specifics around them.
Yeah, so the case I was thinking of was actually at NYPD here in New York earlier this summer. I can find the articles about it and send it around afterwards if people are interested. But it was one of the Black Lives Matter co-founders who was arrested based on police NYPD using facial recognition to locate and to track him. So when we see things like that, it becomes clear that the risk that civil society are raising about this technology is not just hypothetical, but real, and need to be addressed now. And on the other hand, on the other side of law enforcement use is the commercial use. So my background is in business and human rights, and I focus more on corporate responsibility. And this is where we really, I think, need more attention. So the dangers with law enforcement use are very clear, but I think we don't pay enough attention to when this technology is being used in commercial spaces. So for instance, if you go to a Target and Target is using facial recognition to determine who could be a shoplifter, the fact that a private company could have a technology that supposedly makes that determination for it is one layer of a red flag and of a warning. Another layer is the fact that they're storing this information. So for it to work, they need a database. And companies could have a database or like a blacklist of faces that they share amongst each other to say, well, this person shoplifted at whatever other store, and therefore be denied entry into a different store. So the dangers that come with commercial use of facial recognition might not be, are not on the same scale, for instance, as with law enforcement use, but nevertheless, they're really important and could have grave risks for privacy, for security, and just for non-discrimination of having equal access to the same kinds of opportunities that other people do. So like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter how much we try to take the bias away from the technology itself, because it's not going to be used in the same way. And one big solution that we see with this is a ban on facial recognition. But when we talk about a ban, I think we have to be very careful about what exactly we mean. So I mentioned earlier that one type of actual facial recognition is detection. So we're not asking for a ban on your phone, on you being able to unlock your iPhone with your face, or for your camera to recognize if there's a face. But when it's technology that could lead to mass surveillance, like with identification, or technology that is just fundamentally meant to assign people different social attributes like classification, those are the starting points where we can discuss where bans are happening. And I'll be interested to hear more from some of the people in this group and working at local levels of what the conversation is like there, because I don't think I gave an introduction about Access Now earlier, but we're an international organization, so we don't work quite as much on the local levels, but we try to learn from other society organizations who are doing that. And so far, what we've seen specifically in the US is that some of the most exciting developments to come out of facial recognition are really on the local level. We haven't seen anything happen yet on a federal level, which does lead me to a question that Ethan asked earlier about the bill in Congress right now on facial recognition. So there's a bill in Congress that I think it's meant to ban facial recognition, and it follows a bill at a state level. I would just say, like, when it comes to Congress and the federal level at the US, I am less hopeful. I think a lot of that depends on what happens next week, whether or not this is something that could even be contemplated here. So with the partner organizations that we work with throughout the world, we're seeing, rather than in places where waiting for a bill to ban this technology is kind of like a pipe dream, that there are things like litigation, for instance, that are happening, particularly in Asia and in Africa. We have lots of partners who are working there who are taking cases to court, and using the judiciary to bring bans and limitations on facial recognition. I think that on the US side, one of the more important things we can do is really raising the awareness of the companies that are providing those kinds of technology, and trying to rein them in. So one good example of this is Clearview AI. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure that many of you must have heard about Clearview, that really rose to prominence about a year or so ago. So Clearview AI is a company that was kind of like very much under the radar until a big New York Times article came out, exposing the fact that this company essentially scrapes, I think, the entire internet. So rather than just having, a small database, they have the entire internet as their database. Facebook, Twitter, any kind of social media that you have, anything on the internet. So they use their tool to compare against that. And they've been selling it to government authorities in the US and abroad. They refuse to make their client list public so that we don't know exactly who it is they're selling to. And while at first they were saying, oh, we only sell to governments for very restricted use, to fight crime, so forth. And then of course, more news came out that they were selling to private actors as well. One interesting example was to the guy, I forget his name, but the guy who's the owner of Gristedes in New York, was one of their clients using this technology to check out his daughter's boyfriend, which seems like an innocuous thing, but the fact that a private individual could have that level of sensitive information on an individual is really frightening. So on the US side, I think that what we can continue to focus on is on the work that's being done at a local level. And particularly since the conversation in many places is still at the beginning phase, is raising awareness of the disparate impacts that facial recognition has. So everything we've discussed of the risks that it has of something as small as not being able to get into your phone or into your building to being detained increases when we realize that these technologies are being used disproportionately against communities of color. And again, it's a community that are more likely to be misidentified by this technology, that's more likely to be used against them. So there are just many levels there. And I think that in the US context, that's one other area we can focus on, is ensuring that these risks are as clear and as public as possible, because I find that the more people understand what exactly facial recognition is and what it does, the more alarm there is. I mean, when you walk down the streets and you see a camera in a public space, you don't understand if there's a difference between just a regular security camera or something that is matching your face in real time to a database on the internet. So just raising awareness about what this technology is and the dangers it poses, I think is a really good place for us to start. And of course, for us to pass a federal data protection law in the US, which we don't have, and a bill specifically on facial recognition. Fingers crossed if next week goes well. So I'll kind of stop there, and let people jump in on questions.
I have two questions, but if anyone else has questions, they take priority over mine. I'll just ask my questions really quick. So let's see, what were they? Okay, so along the lines of what happens next week, in your work, have you found that facial recognition surveillance is a partisan issue, or is it kind of unpredictable?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I will say that at Access Now, we haven't worked quite as much at the US level as we have internationally, but it does seem to be one of those issues that does unite, that is as nonpartisan as things can get these days. Because on one hand, we have the issue of privacy, of security, that I think kind of like everyone can understand and can agree to. But but then we also have the issue of when it's being used in commercial spaces. So of having like the corporate interests behind it. So it seems like it's generally, it should be, well, I'll say it seems like it's something that should be a nonpartisan issue, but we do live in a time when the most nonpartisan issues are contested or hotly contested. But it generally should be, but I think a lot just kind of depends on the kind of Congress that we have and the will there is there to actually take this on. Because again, we're still kind of like at the beginning stages of understanding this technology and what it is. I'm sure you've seen some of the Congress hearings where you have Congress people who barely understand how an iPhone works, like trying to grapple with technologies like this that are much more advanced. So yeah, frankly, I'm not sure, and I have a lot of hope there.
So the one thing along those lines that I just want to comment is you brought up Clearview AI, and I'm glad that you did, because actually when I get to my part about the investigation, a police department in our county did demo Clearview AI. Luckily, they did not sign a contract with them, but I'll get into the details of that when you're done talking. But something very interesting about Clearview AI is the founder's ties to the far right, and he's I mean, like most Silicon Valley or tech CEOs, they're very they have a lot of faith in their products, and he definitely does. But I do find his ties to the alt-right extremely interesting, given what he does. Anyway, my next question, if there aren't any other questions, so I'm going to ask it, and if there aren't any, then you could go ahead and answer it, or you could get to it later on. Is what is your impression of companies such as Amazon and Microsoft and then IBM? And I know that's kind of a spectrum, right? Amazon has only said that they're going to stop selling their facial recognition software to law enforcement for a year. IBM has completely stopped development, right? That's like an entirely different spectrum, right? And so I'd just like to get if there are your thoughts on there, and if you're hopeful that more companies are going to go that way. But like I said, I want to give other people in the room a chance to ask questions before you go ahead and answer mine.
Yeah, I can answer that real quickly, and I'm glad you brought that up. That was a very busy week for us at work. So yes, so for those who don't know, Amazon, Microsoft, and IBM all in like the second or third week of June announced some form of a moratorium on their sale of a moratorium or a total like stop or ban or halt on their sale of facial recognition technology to law enforcement. That was interesting. So I'll start with Amazon. The Amazon announcement was interesting because Amazon is a company that we've really tried to engage over time. So lots of my work is trying to engage with companies on issues of technology and human rights, of privacy, free expression, and so forth. And Amazon has been very famously tight-lipped and very resistant to engage with civil society on any of these issues. And their announcement came just a month after shareholders voted on a proposal on customer due diligence of Amazon surveillance products. So at Access Now, we're working with some of the shareholders who brought that. And like I said, Amazon doesn't listen. They don't listen to civil society. They didn't listen to their investors, to their shareholders. And so for me, the first question when I heard that announcement is, why now? And of course, it was very obvious why now, right? Because this came right at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests. So I think what that says to me is that we really need pressure on companies from all sides. We need pressure from civil society. We need pressure from investors. And investor groups are a group that we've been working a lot with over the last year or two. And it's very exciting to see people who have kind of a different level of power and sway over a company pushing for progressive human rights respecting policies. So we need investors, we need civil society, we need mass movements in order to kind of cause even company change. And we find that in the US, oftentimes when that happens, that's then the governments can take notice as well. But that said, so while it was, it was commendable and it was definitely due to the hard work of a wide group of stakeholders pushing for this. The announcements from Amazon, even from IBM and Microsoft as well, leave a lot of questions. So I know that IBM, they've gone for some sort of like company reorganization recently, where they've separated their cloud computing business and trying to focus more on AI, which we'll see what that looks like. But lots of most of the statements that these companies put out, like, I think are nice, but still leave a lot of questions. Like, so they say that they'll stop selling to police departments, but that they'll stop selling. So what about existing tools that they've provided? Do they have any limitations on how those tools be used? If their statements are saying things like, recognize the impacts that it could have, the racial disparities, what about the existing use of this technology they've already provided? And many of them are very clear, carefully worded to specifically be just about police departments, which doesn't cover use by ICE, for instance. And one of the big questions is, what are they doing for the companies that are doing a moratorium, a 1-year moratorium? What are they doing during this 1 year to address the issues that they mentioned? And the answer to that might not be kind of as positive as would hope, because we see, for instance, like even a company like Microsoft, who, to their credit, have done lots of good things in terms of human rights, but companies can make a very kind of timely, PR-friendly statement about putting a pause on some kind of technology while they're quietly advocating against bans and against any kind of limitations for the very technology that they were saying has issues. So I think while it's great that those companies have made what is really, not just words, but actually action, I think there's still so much left that they could be doing. And even if not doing, but at least providing clarity about what they mean, of who else has it, are they still selling to ICE, what kinds of commercial uses are still being used for their technology, and what do they plan to do going forward? Those are all things that we would definitely want the question to. And actually, this leads me to a question that you brought up earlier, Ethan, about who benefits and profits from this technology. So that is, I think, always a question that we should ask when we're talking about different kinds of technologies, because we won't be able to change the way the technology is being used until we understand who is benefiting and who has the power to keep things the way they are. And my answer to that would be, it's mainly the companies. So yeah, law enforcement, police departments can use it, and they can, benefit by making their departments more efficient and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's the companies like Amazon, like Microsoft, that are making deals with the US government, with foreign governments, and with lots of other smaller companies that are really the ones that are benefiting. Since we don't have a federal data protection law here in the US, that means that when harm occurs, there's not really much recourse for people who have suffered from this technology. There's still a lot of lack of transparency around the algorithms that companies are using, because they can hide under the trade secrets, kind of argument. So yeah, I would say it's really the companies that are holding data on people, and the companies that are financially benefiting by being the providers of this technology to law enforcement, to other actors as well.
So I kind of wanted to ask a question. I know Ethan is very well versed in this. I know you are very aware of what's going on. I'm barely learning about all of this. I mean, here in California, we had Prop 24, which I know Ethan can go into. Nobody was talking about it over here. It wasn't until Ethan's page posted some information on it, and how it was very misleading. I would have voted yes if I didn't see Ethan's post on it. And I'm always curious as to why the population doesn't really take into account how important this is, this facial recognition, and just the way companies use data against us. Just curious on what your thoughts are on that, and trying to rally people around that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And it's kind of at the heart of a lot of what we do. So the people, when we talk about technologies, we often talk about the users of technologies as the ones that we need to watch out watch out for, but like in a positive way. But facial recognition is one of those technologies that the people using it are not the only ones who could be harmed by it, right? So as individuals going to a protest, we're not using facial recognition, and yet we're the ones who could be harmed by use of that technology. So I think a lot of this is just really helping people understand, well, first, what the technology is. I think it's hard for someone to get a clear understanding of what exactly it means that a system is scanning your face, storing information, matching it against a database without your consent. So this goes beyond the question of like, you know, privacy policies and consent that people can give, because most of the people that facial recognition is being used on don't get to consent. So I think that it really, yeah, that's a problem. And I'm sure that you guys who are doing work more at the grassroots level will have better answers to this. But I think that's really where we need to start, is by helping people understand the difference between just kind of the surveillance that we've gotten used to as a society, and then invasive ways that facial recognition can work. So whether it's whether it's like capturing your face, identifying you, where the information is being stored, and who and what's being done with it. And you know, for people in the US, I think we're very consented to technology is a big deal and issue for us. And the fact that this is not the kind of technology oftentimes that you can consent to. So if like one of the tasks I mentioned earlier of verification, so if you're trying to get into your apartment building, for instance, or an office building, ideally you'll be able to consent to whether that technology is being used on you. But if you're just going out in the street and this technology is being used and you don't know, there's no way for you to consent. So yeah, I think that it's kind of an uphill battle, but it's one that we really need to do, is to help communities understand what exactly this technology is and what it's doing. And when it's being sort of like quietly implemented. So the example I mentioned earlier of the tenants in New York a few years ago who came together and kind of fought this, that was because they were aware. For a while, they didn't know that it wasn't just a security camera, but facial recognition. So yeah, it's just a matter of wherever we see this happening, making a noise about it as much as we can. And I think there was another question from earlier that you asked, Ethan, about people, how you can keep yourself safe. So yeah.
Can I give a little bit of context for
yes,
really quick?
24, yeah.
So I think this is when your Wi-Fi cut out, but there one of the co-sponsors of this event is an organization called Hero Tent, and what they do is they go to protests around the Bay Area, and they even went up to Portland for a while to help give food and water and medical assistance to demonstrators, right? And two of their members have actually been wrongfully arrested here in our county, and so I think that's that this question that you're about to answer is particularly relevant here for our community.
Great, yeah. I think protests are probably the biggest one of the biggest things we need to protect right now is our right to protest. So some tips to keep yourself safe. I know EFF, actually, they have a guide on things you should be aware of, digital safety tips for when people go out to protest, and includes things like, if possible, turning off your location on your phone so that there's not that kind of tracking. But when it comes to facial recognition, there isn't, I don't know, people, now that we have masks, that can probably help to some extent. But at the end of the day, not to sound too pessimistic, but there isn't really much we can do when technology is being updated frequently and constantly to identify even faces that are obscured in some way. So earlier this, I think it was earlier this year, yeah, in protests in Hong Kong, the government authorities there started using technology that was meant to identify people wearing masks. But other basic kind of things that we can do to keep ourselves safe when protesting, is turning off turning off your location. When you take photos and share photos online, don't include faces if possible, so that those faces won't be able to be tracked later. And scrubbing images of the metadata. So there are ways of doing that. If you like take a picture on your phone and you send it to yourself through an encrypted platform like Signal, for instance, that can scrub a photo of its metadata. Then you can post it without worrying about other kinds of information from that being tracked later, blurring out faces and things like that. But when you're there within the protests, some of the things that you can do to keep yourself safe, I'll send the EFF guide along because it's really, really thorough.
And we've also given a workshop that goes over a lot of what you just went over. If the people that are interested in watching it, they could go to cpcscc.org/101. And we actually use a lot of the EFF curriculum that you just talked about is what it's based on. So.
And I'll also mention that Access Now has a digital security helpline that's 24/7 and operates in, I think, like 9 languages. The helpline is a tool for human rights defenders, for NGOs, for journalists, and it's free. I'll again more information I'll send along, but you can go to Access Now and search digital security helpline. You'll find information there, but it helps people, NGOs, human rights offenders, keep their accounts safe. And actually, one thing we're trying to do this year is monitor cases within the US as we get closer to the election of attacks against civil society and things that we can do to keep them safe. So yeah, the Access Now digital security helpline is also a good tool if people need it. Right. And I think I just wanted to mention another good forum for this is, I was talking earlier with Ethan about RightsCon. So at Access Now, we also host a human rights summit called RightsCon that happens every year. It's usually somewhere amazing. This year it's supposed to be in Costa Rica, but thanks to COVID, this year it was online. And next year it will likely be online as well. But if you want to get connected to other civil society organizations doing similar work, and particularly to get connected to people internationally, RightsCon is a great tool for that. A lot of the panels and sessions from RightsCon are actually still available on Access Now's YouTube website. So if you go to Access Now YouTube, you'll find talks by Shoshana Zuboff on surveillance capitalism, by Rashad Robinson from Color of Change, and many, many more. So it's a great way to kind of learn more about some of the things that we're talking about today.
So just another really quick plug, that book that you just mentioned, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, we're actually going to be starting a book club, reading that book in November. If anybody is interested in joining us, email us at contact@cpcscc.org. Let's see. Oh, damn! I had a question that I wanted to follow up on. Oh yeah. So I really appreciate you talking about the threat of private entities using this as well, and not just governments and law enforcement, because that obviously is a real threat that a lot of people don't think about. And recently, Portland, who passed a facial recognition ban, they were able to successfully ban its use by private entities for surveillance and government entities. And that is something that we would like to do here in Santa Clara County. I don't know if you have any insight into how Portland was successful doing that, right? Because it seemed like it's an uphill battle doing it for law enforcement, and then because we live in such a capitalist society, I imagine it's going to be even a bigger battle for doing it for private entities.
Yeah, I have no idea what sort of magic they pulled in Portland to make that happen. And really the most surprising part is that it was also a ban on private sector use of this technology as well. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't I don't know, and I wish I did, because then we can replicate this model all throughout the country, and hopefully on a national level as well. But the question that Jose was asking earlier, I think, might be a way to start, right? So of mobilizing local communities to understand what this technology is, the risks that it poses, and then pushing for change on that level. A good example, I guess, is in New York earlier this year, we had the Post Act, which was meant to provide civilian oversight of the surveillance technology that NYPD was purchasing. And the Post Act had been languishing for years and years and years. But this year, thanks to the protests and the momentum from the Black Lives Matter protests, it like sailed through. So I think it really is just raising awareness kind of as much as possible, and getting activists involved on the local level that can hopefully kind of spur change. And we see, you know, the big, it's never just one thing. I mentioned earlier that it's civil society, it's investors, it's everyone kind of saying the same thing over and over again, and not being shy until the companies hear us and until governments hear us as well.
To give a little more context, your answer to Jose's question is actually exactly why we're doing this session here, right? Everybody that I've talked to, when I talk about the dangers of not only facial recognition, but just mass surveillance in general, they're aware that it's a thing, but they just don't really know exactly how dangerous or what to do or where to start, right? And so that's part of the reason why our organization, the Citizens Privacy Coalition, exists, is to educate our local community so that we can build on that momentum that other communities have like they have done and gotten these things banned.
And I think a place to start with that is just kind of understanding the contracts between law enforcement and government authorities at a local level and companies. So we're doing this again on a more of an international level, but just seeing in places where technology can be provided at low cost or even for free to law enforcement, that should be, if a government is using this kind of technology, we as citizens have a right to understand what those contracts entail and how it affects us. So more transparency around those as well, I think, could really be useful resources and tools as we're trying to fight this technology. I think I interrupted you. Okay.
Somebody did ask if you could put the links to those resources and the event in the chat here in Zoom. That would be fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions? There haven't been any that have come in during the stream or anything. I want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to ask whatever they want.
I just want to say thank you for coming out and teaching us. You know, I'm, like I said, I'm very new to this. Like Ethan was saying earlier, we all know that this is a problem. We just don't know where to start, you know, and education first is key, but also just organizing. So I want to thank Ethan too for organizing this coalition together, because this is a big issue, especially right now with technology growing how it is. So thank you again for doing all of this.
No, thanks so much for having me here. I think I mentioned at the beginning that some of the most exciting stuff we're seeing is coming out of local and grassroots organizations. So supporting the work that you're doing as much as possible is really key for the big changes that happen. So thank you guys for the work you're doing.
Thank you. So if there aren't any more, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else to?
Oh, no, we can go ahead.
Okay, cool. If there's not any more questions for Isedua, I'll go ahead and I'll take just like 10 minutes and I recently conducted an investigation to try and understand how law enforcement agencies in Santa Clara County are using these very dangerous and racist and corrupt technologies of facial recognition, right? And so I submitted 2 public records requests to every single law enforcement agency in the county, except for I foolishly forgot to include like San Jose State and Stanford Police on there. I'm actually not sure exactly what jurisdictions those fall under, so I maybe might have them covered, but I just realized that just today. Anyway, and the idea was, I sent a public records request in to every single law enforcement agency and asked them if they're currently using facial recognition technology, if they've ever demoed facial recognition technology, and then because of the way that I worded my original request, one agency got a little deceptive, and we knew that they had previously used facial recognition technology, but they just said we're no longer using it, and technically they did comply with my original request. So I had to send in another one and clarify that I want any use of the technology at any time. And so because of that little hiccup, the investigation isn't completely done, but it is very close. And I have found some very interesting things that I want to share with y'all really quick. Let me spin this up really quick and share my screen. So I was really hoping to have this published when this event started, and just like Murphy's Law, if something can go wrong, it will, and it did. And so when I went to go publish the report, it didn't work. And that was literally like 10 minutes before I was supposed to hop in this webinar. So I'm going to work out those problems and then publish it and make it live, and then share out the everything on social media so everyone can see. But I'm going to share my screen so that y'all can see what we're doing here. So, all right, hopefully y'all can see that. So this is the site that I was going to publish it. This is just a one pager on resources that you can use to help fight facial recognition. Then the very first section you'll see is the state of facial recognition in Santa Clara County, which summarizes a report that I have here entitled "The Use of Facial Recognition by Law Enforcement in Santa Clara County, Past and Present." This table summarizes my findings at a really high level overview without going into detail. You'll see this first column says, have they banned facial recognition, the city or the county? And all of them are no. We don't have a single entity in our county that has banned facial recognition. However, we know that nearby cities such as Oakland and San Francisco, Alameda and Berkeley have done so. So it's definitely not out of the question for us to do so. Now, are they currently using facial recognition? You'll see that with all but the exception of 3, where they actually haven't responded to any of my records requests. As far as we know, none of the law enforcement agencies are currently using facial recognition. That said, you'll see this other one, have they previously used facial recognition? We know for a fact that the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office uses facial recognition, has used facial recognition in the past. They are claiming to me that they no longer use it, and I'm very interested to understand why. And so I have a series. I have communication going back and forth, and hopefully I can publish that communication very soon. But they previously have used facial recognition technology, and I will be publishing those documents, but for various investigations and whatnot. San Jose are the biggest police department, I'm pretty sure, in our county. They have shown interest a number of times. They have actually demoed, about 3 years ago, they demoed a facial recognition solution. And I'm still digging into those documents, but I'm sure that they did use it in investigations. But you'll see the other bigger cities such as Sunnyvale and Santa Clara, they've never used it. They've never tested it. Milpitas, Gilroy, and this is organized by population, right? So the lower we get down on the table, the smaller the city is. And you'll see that here in this column, there's quite a few that are purple and that we don't know, and that's because they haven't responded to my second records request asking if they've previously used it, and that's fine because they're still within the legal limit of how many days they have to respond to it. So just a handful of them have. You'll see this is the one that I wanted to point out here. The city of Mountain View they did a demo of Clearview AI's app. And for those of you, I mean, obviously the locals know, I don't know, Isedua, if you know, but that's actually where Google is headquartered, is the city of Mountain View, and a huge tech hub, right? But it's very interesting. They started the demo in about November or December of last year, and they were really, really excited about it, and they were having great results. And they actually say that they caught somebody that was peddling child pornography with it and whatnot. But then it was the New York Times article that Isedua was talking about that exposed Clearview AI for the first time for what they were doing. And as a recap, what they do is they scrape the entire internet and pull down all of your pictures that you've ever posted on Facebook that are public, and Instagram and YouTube and LinkedIn, everything, anywhere, right? And they have by far the biggest facial recognition database of images that we know of. They have over 3 billion images. It's probably a lot higher now. And law enforcement and Clearview AI, they claim that it's very accurate. They haven't shown any statistics that demonstrate how accurate it is on people of color. We all know that people of color and women is where facial recognition technology really starts to get very inaccurate. We're talking in like magnitudes of 100. A Black individual is 100 times more likely to be misidentified by facial recognition technology. Anyway, they demoed it, and they were in the middle of the demo when this article came out. The article came out, and they were really excited about it. But then the email chain that I have between them and the Clearview sales representative, there's a huge gap in between January and May, and I assume that a lot of it's due to COVID. And in May, the Clearview AI sales representative reached back out and said if they were interested on actually signing a contract, and they said no, they were no longer interested, which was a stark contrast to the previous emails. And I honestly don't know. I am going to ask them directly, but I hope that the negative press and the wonderful journalism of the New York Times and BuzzFeed News did a bunch of really great follow-up articles exposing Clearview AI, swayed them to not go this route. So yeah, that's a really high level summary. Like I said, we're in pretty good shape. I know that the Santa Clara County Sheriff was using facial recognition quite a bit for various things, but they say that they no longer are. So I'm very interested to hear the story there when they get back to me on my second records request. And I will definitely publicize that once I do know. But as you can see, we have 3 law enforcement agencies who have shown interest in using this technology in our very own backyard. And that is why I am proposing right now that we do what I think it's 14 cities now, most recently Portland, Oregon, and Portland, Maine, that have banned the use of facial recognition in their cities. As Isedua said, there's actually a bill being proposed in Congress to ban it nationwide right now, but we're not going to wait for the bureaucracy of Washington to ban it for us. Please feel free when this is published. I do have a link to contact your federal representatives, Ro Khanna and Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris are our representatives, to express your support. But we're going to have a lot more effect if we're going to city council meetings here. So when this is published, you'll see there's a link to a petition for every single city. If you are a resident of that city, please go and sign that petition to tell your council members that you want to ban this facial recognition technology. I'm going to be out in the community. I'm actually doing SJ Roll Call on November 7th. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's an education and also community service organization where they go around and they clean up the city, but then they also take stops, and then they have somebody talk to them about political things that are going on, movements that are going on and whatnot. And they've asked me to come out for the SJ Roll Call on November 7th to talk about this facial recognition technology, right? So I'm going to be out doing that. I need a lot of help. You'll see this column. It says coalition representative. Does our organization have a representative for each of these cities to actually be the liaison with their council members to start influencing them and talking to them about banning it. We don't have any for any cities right now. And if you are interested in volunteering, please get in contact with us. You could go to cpcscc.org/contact or email us at contact@cpcscc.org, right? And again, I apologize that this is not live yet. It will be tomorrow, but you'll be able to see the details of all the reports. In fact, here you'll see I give a summary of what I just of what happened with Mountain View, and I actually post the actual documents that they shared with me as well. And you can see the email chain. And they, like I said, Mountain View used this in active investigations while they were doing a demo of it and whatnot. So it is affecting us whether we realize it or not already, even though currently none of our law enforcement agencies are employing it. So call to action, sign the petition when it's finally published. Again, I apologize, it's not right now, but it will be tomorrow. Any questions or anything about that, about my findings, about the investigation from anyone, including yourself, Isedua?
No, I was going to jump in and say that is really, really fascinating, and I can't wait until you publish it to kind of to share with our groups here, because I mentioned earlier investor groups that we're working with, and they're getting much more interested in this kind of advocacy that's going on at the local level. So being able to share this kind of comprehensive findings with them would be really great. And if you or anyone of any of the other organizations here ever have kind of specific issues to specific companies that you want to raise, we work with investors to actually write shareholder proposals so that even if they don't pass, but you can point to it and say, you know, this is what your shareholders want, and it's another way to kind of drive change. But no, just really great work, and especially the stuff about Mountain View and Clearview is really fascinating.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm really glad that you said that about the shareholders, because I mean, Santa Clara County is Silicon Valley, right? And we have many of these companies that are making these technologies are right here in our backyard. And I would love to, partner with you on that and maybe link up with some people, because like we have a huge Amazon office, there's various facial recognition tech startups that are here. Unfortunately, Clearview AI is not one of them, but anyway, we would love to have a local impact on the private sector as well.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Cool. Are there any final questions for myself or Isedua, or? Going once, going twice. Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Isedua, for your. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a question that wanted to be asked? It's all right. You can. Isedua's on Twitter. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to answer there, and or email as well. I believe her contact information is on Access Now, or you can reach out to me and I can get you in contact. So anyway, thank you so much. Seriously, we are so grateful for your time, Isedua. We will definitely be in contact, and hopefully Access Now can help us out and also follow our journey in banning facial recognition here in Santa Clara County.
Thanks again so much for letting me join. This was really, really fascinating and helpful for the work that I'm doing as well. So thank you, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Have a good night.